Go ahead. Okay. John Kreis with us. Correct pronunciation?
Yep, perfect.
All right, John Kreis with us here. Penn football. Moving on. John, 1984 through 1986. John, first of all, we're fortunate to have the Hall of Famer over here in the broadcast.
Absolutely.
Here today, so I want you to go back and I want you to tell me about your great relationship that you had with the legendary Vaughn Dunbar, a Fort Wayne Snyder fan.
Well, actually, I don't know that it was legendary, at least not for me. For him, it was legendary. As we opened up against Fort Wayne Schneider, it was actually the very first play of the game. He came around the end. Our defensive end got pancaked and collapsed, and it was me and him. Now, I'm 180 pounds soaking wet with all my pads on, and he's 225 and got thighs the size of most people's midsection, and he just ran right over the top of me. He tripped over me, so I stopped him, but I separated my shoulder on the very first play of the game. So that was my 15 seconds of Vaughn Dunbar, I guess. Later on in the game, as Coach Giesman just alluded to, he scored a touchdown on a very similar play when we collided just at the 1 yard line, and he carried me into the end zone, I guess, on that play. But he was a pretty formidable opponent for sure.
Over the course of the last 24 hours, we've heard stories from coaches and former athletes talking about the Penn Way, what the Penn Way is. When Coach Giesman first arrived in town, along with Dr. Spiker, they created a mantra, if you will, or a dynamic that they were going to be great in everything, from the robotics to all the high school sports that were going to be involved. So it was a mindset and a culture shift here in this local geographical community. What does the Penn Way mean to you, especially now as a local business owner?
Well, I think the thing that I continue to go back to, Pat, when I started thinking about coming in here and some of the stories that I could tell, or some of the maybe something that I might be able to add to what you're trying to accomplish here. I think that the biggest thing the Penn Way means to me is just pride and tradition. And I started to think about some of the practices and some of the things that happened, and then maybe even some of just the little things that that you did, but that you wanted to make sure that you did correctly. Okay, because if you didn't do them correctly, even if as a little thing, somebody was watching you. Somebody was saying, no, we want this done this way. We want it done that way. And that's the ins and outs, or the blocking and tackling piece. Now, as far as the pride and the tradition, there were a lot of guys that came before us. Okay, class of '86 is when I graduated. You didn't want to let those guys down, because you knew they were watching you. Yeah, and you knew that they were still. I think there was a slogan, once a Kingsman, always a Kingsman type of thing, and I'm sure that probably there's other programs that have something similar to that. But those guys that were that had graduated, that had forged the way, you wanted to make sure that you were holding up the tradition that they started. So the Penn Way, or the Kingsman Way, I guess to me means taking pride in what you do, doing it right, and doing it at the very highest level that you can do it.
You played during the era of the first state championship.
Correct.
You look back on that dynamic and what it did for the local community. Give us an idea, and Chris talks about this a lot. After they won the first state championship, they kind of were giggling about the fact that why didn't we do this before? But as a player, and as you're seeing your school winning the state championship for the first time, can you share your thoughts about this?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is it's once you have done it once, of course you get a taste of it and you want to do it again. In '83 I was a sophomore. And that senior class was unbelievable. I mean, they were just a group of just great mentors and great human beings, and just a lot of kids that just worked their tails off, to achieve what they achieved. As far as what it did for the community, I think it took and validated, and not that it needed to, but I think it validated everything Chris Giesman was trying to accomplish here at Penn. You look at a guy like Dan Marino, who is a great quarterback but never won a championship. He's still a great quarterback, but he didn't have that validation. I think once we won the state, for the first time, it went, oh wow, this thing does work, and this thing is impressive, and people started looking at Northern Indiana, as a force to be reckoned with, as opposed to just all the Indianapolis schools. So I think it put us on the map, so to speak, put Penn on the map.
Chris put a lot of authority on his position coaches. They were head coaches in their own separate ways. And let's just talk about your position coach and the impact that your position coach had in your life, and conversely, the relationship between the assistant coach and the head coach.
Well, I can speak to my position coach, and I'll speak very passionate. I was very, very fortunate that I got to play for Wally Yeoman, and Wally was a very passionate individual, very intense individual. I mean, when he was on the field, you knew he was on the field. When he was around, you knew he was around, and he was a guy you just never wanted to disappoint. You always were. You'd bleed for that guy, and I think that as the speed of the ship is the speed of the captain, so to speak, and I think that's what Chris Giesman brought to the table as well. But playing for Wally was, other than maybe my parents, or definitely my parents and my grandparents, Wally probably had a huge impact on my life, just because he expected nothing less than perfection. He'd get into you. I mean, there's no question about it. If you didn't do it right or didn't do it as well as he thought you should, he'd get into you. He'd smack you on the head, or he may try to. He was a little guy, so he couldn't quite get up there, but he might try to kick you in the butt if he could. But he was also the guy that once you got it, or once you did exactly the way he wanted it done, he'd praise you. And he'd come up to you, and he'd wrap his arms around you. He wasn't afraid to show emotion on both sides of the table. Both, hey, you got to do better than that, and then, hey, kid, you got it. He's just a great guy. I don't know. I can't say enough good things about him.
I want you to reflect back on some Penn moments during all the. Chris talks about this a lot with his coaching staff. Every day they had fun. And I know that some of that humor kind of spilled onto the football team, as well as there were some serious moments. So you have the yin and yang there of experience. Well, I want you to take me back to some humorous moments, maybe one of those Wally moments that still to this day you laugh and you snickle about. You got a favorite Penn moment on the humorous side of things that jump off the page at you?
Yeah, I've got several, but I mean, probably the one that sticks out the most, and we kind of talked a little bit about this prior to me coming in here, is that practice was always intense, but it was a teaching moment, it was a coaching moment, it was a mentoring moment, and things like that. But I think the story that sticks out the most is, and I can't remember the opponent, but they ran what they call a waggle play. And basically what that is the wide receiver kind of runs kind of a post pattern and tries to get behind the defensive backs while there's some other stuff going on in a different area of the field. So the object is you're paying attention to the other stuff that's going on in the field, and the wide receiver runs behind you, and it's called a waggle. And we had ran it 4 or 5 times in practice, and of course I'd screwed it up 4 or 5 times in practice, and I got the wrath of Wally 4 or 5 times, and then probably the 3rd or the 4th time, maybe the 5th time, I can't, again, recall the exact amount. The guy got behind me, they caught the pass, and he came running off the sidelines, just yelling, waggle, 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 and just, tried to kick me in the behind, I mean, everybody, the defense is over here, the offense is over here, there's stuff going on over here, everything stopped. Everything stopped, and the spotlight was on me because I'd screwed it up 3 or 4 times. It's one of those things that he just wanted perfection. I mean, he wanted perfection, and you know, probably, you know, I think later on, you know, in the game later that week, I can't remember the exact thing, you know, exact who we were playing or anything, but I remember him coming down to me, and they'd run the play 2 or 3 times, and we'd shut it down every single time. I mean, it wasn't even an option that they were gonna you know, make that play successful. And he came down to me and he kind of tapped me on the, you know, on the head, and he said, "You figured it out, didn't you? You got it." You know, and that's, I guess, that's the epitome of Penn football to me. Is, you know, they're gonna make sure you do it right, but they're gonna make sure you do it right, you know, because on game day, you're gonna see it. You know, and I said this in an interview one time with the paper. You know, anything that, you know, the South Bend Tribune, anything that you got run at you in a game, you saw it 100 times in practice. I mean, the scouting that Penn did, the assistant coaches, the middle school coaches that scouted the opponent. They didn't run anything at you that you didn't see coming, and you practiced it 100 times in practice to make sure you got it right. And, you know, the assistant coaches made sure that you did that, and then that all came down from the head coach, no question.
All right, now let's take this to a serious note. There's always one of those life-defining moments that most people will have during the course of their athletic career. Obviously, had a chance to win a state championship is a pretty special thing for a young kid, and I believe you mentioned before as a 10th grader. So I don't know if there was a special defining moment about what Penn football means to you.
I've got 2, if you don't mind. The first one was when we were playing in the state championship game. And I was a sophomore. I did not dress for the playoff games. I think I dressed for the Northam game, which was maybe the first game we played. Again, it's 30 years. But it was a championship game, and we were getting it handed to us pretty good in the first half. We were down. We didn't play particularly well. In fact, it was probably wasn't one of our better first halves. And the kids, you know, the players were coming off the field, and they had their heads hung. I mean, they were, you know, we were down, and you know, we were all, the kids, those of us that weren't dressing were just yelling at them, you know, "Keep your heads up, keep your heads up, keep your heads up." And I remember yelling, you know, "This isn't over. We can do this." And Larry Chrisman, who played defensive tackle at the time, snapped his head up and just kind of looked in the stands. Of course, you know, he didn't know who said it or anything like that. And I think at that particular moment for me, he looked at it as, you know what, yeah, we played a pretty crappy first half of football, but it's not over with. And then we came out the second half and took care of business. And so I guess the moral of the story, I guess, Pat, is yes, we were down. You know, yes, we didn't play very well, but those kids, those players, those seniors, I mean, and again, I mentioned earlier, we had great senior leadership in 83, 84, and those guys were unbelievable. And then they must have went in the locker room and just said, you know what, we need to put it together, and they came out and did it. You know.
Second story?
Second story is when I was a senior, and again, I might get a little choked up on this one. I came running, it was after a game, and we won pretty well, and I had a pretty good senior season, and we came walking off the field after the game, and Coach Giesman's son came up to me, you know, and he was a little squirt at the time. I don't remember how old he was, but, you know, 6, 8, maybe 9 years old, if even that, you know, and he says, "Can I have your wristbands?" You know, and I'm thinking, here's the coach's son, and he wants my wristbands, you know, and I thought, okay, you know, didn't think too much of it, but, you know, I gave him my wristbands. I mean, I'm a 16, 17-year-old kid at the time. I mean, you know, it's not that big a deal. So later on that week, or the next week in practice, Coach Giesman comes up to me and goes, "You know, my son watches you. He looks up to you." You know, and I thought, ooh, that's kind of a big deal. And it never really dawned on me that there were little kids out there that were watching what you do and how you do it and the way you do it. You know, and again, you want to talk about the epitome of Penn football? I mean, you were in the spotlight, but the head coach's son is watching me and how I act and how I do things. That's a pretty big deal. You've got a responsibility there, and hopefully the kids that have come after us took that seriously as I did.